I know it's been a while. Got Coach Tucker here. I don't know personally as far as we've not met face to face yet, but over the last few months through quarantine, been in touch and talking, and just something where we share some ideologies. And I wanted to bring him on and talk with my staff. He's in a very unique position right now with having athletes who haven't been on campus in 6 months and kind of getting them back rolling. And we definitely want to hit on that. For those of you that have been following Coach on Instagram and kind of pay attention to the strength world of things in social media, he's talking about Sprintember, been running this and has some ideas that we're going to talk about through that today as well. So excited to have you on, Coach. Thanks for joining us.
Coach, appreciate you having me. Been fun connecting with your staff, so looking forward to this conversation.
100%. Well, these are always pretty formal, Coach, and we'll probably get into 17 different topics. But why don't we just start with what I talked about? Obviously, the most pressing issue, and you're obviously not the only one in the boat, but you're currently going through it, is just what you're dealing with having campus and our athletes getting back on campus now. What's been your thought process, one, over the last 6 months of having them away from you, and then as you transition back into training them, what's some things that maybe you've learned this first couple of weeks having them back, and I don't know if there's anything you're going to change moving forward as well, but where are you at with all that?
Yeah, I think we're in obviously a unique time. I don't think we need to hear the word unprecedented any more than we have, but right now we are in a time where every athlete is anxious to get back to training. Every coach is anxious to push them back into training. So we have to kind of listen, not into our instincts and hold back, right? We have at least 4, maybe 11 months at this point to return to playing a sport. So the simpler, the better. And they just spent 5 months on the couch, right? And you can say all you want about how your team's the most bought in and the most disciplined and all that stuff. Nobody had access to weights. Very few people, unless they had a rack in their basement. In Philadelphia, they were kicking people off of tracks and out of parks. So they couldn't get their sprints in unless it was on the pavement down the street. So training was immensely affected, right? So now we're trying to bridge the gap from sitting on the couch to a collision sport. And if you look at the 11-month process, then we have a long amount of time. You look at the 4-month, we have a more shortened time frame. But the semester's 11 or 13 weeks, and then they're back home for 5 or 8. Like if you're a school like us where you go home Thanksgiving, you don't come back, you have 9 weeks. So there's a lot of different scenarios that play out, but the theme is slow cook, slow cook, slow cook. So the way we're attacking that now, and we were kind of touching on it before we started here, was we don't need to jump into an NCAA 8-hour slot, right? We don't need to jump into 8 hours of training right now because they just had 0. Okay. So we are currently doing 2 days of running, 2 days of lifting, 2 days of sprinting, 2 days of lifting. And that is, if they had no access to weights, that's a 200% workload in their lifts. And it's probably a 50% workload in their sprinting. So looking at that, it's like, how rudimentary can we be? How basic can we be? And I've actually been really pleasantly surprised with our guys technically. I thought I'd have to hit reset on a lot of different stuff, but the guys are retaining a lot of information and, picking up where they left off from a technical standpoint, from physically. I mean, it's night and day, everybody has that bell curve of their athletes when it comes to training, and where that curve is at now, you have the guys who they've done everything, they've done more than enough. And then you have the bulk of the guys in the middle who have done some of the card, most of the card. And then you have the guys on the fringe who didn't do anything. Where's that curve at now? It's probably more towards the guys who did less and less, right? And that's just based on the circumstances at hand. So we have to tailor the training accordingly so we can really have the physical preparedness of these athletes in mind first and foremost. So that's kind of the thought process behind where we're at right now.
Give me the context of your 50%. Like, as far as if I'm on the line and you're taking me through one of your sprint days, as far as this was the first time you touched them, right, in 6 months, what did that first sprint day look for? And then what were you looking for out of that?
I was looking for them to complete it without being extremely exhausted. And so we set it up. Everybody's, 5 yards apart. And, hey, whenever you want to drink, grab it. It's right next to your cone. Like, if you want to sit out a rep, go ahead. Because it really doesn't matter if you do 2 reps instead of 4. It does not at all. So our first day, I split it up, since only 2 running days, didn't split it up ACL Max V like I generally would if we're in the thick of a summer training session. Just went technical movement patterns. So I want exposure. So we went intro plyometric series, intralinear series, intralateral series. So what that looks like is snap downs. I mean, as rudimentary as possible. Snap downs, vertical jump with a stick. Snap downs, long jump with a stick. 3 to 5 reps, right? Full rest, full recovery in between. You waterfall everybody so you get eyes on everybody. It's very technical in nature. They're constantly grabbing drinks, and it's not it's a lot more jovial because the kids are happy to be back, right? Like ultimately, we're all excited to be back. So you much rather like be like, whoa, like everybody chill out than have to put your foot on the gas. So that was like our plyo series. The warm up was at a shorter, more lengthened pace, right? Because guys are huffing, I mean, they're wearing masks. So that's a new stimulus for them. And then the linear series, I mean, doing your power speed stuff, maybe 2 times through instead of 1 time through. And then some 80 to 90% 10-yard starts, 2-point stance, right? Like we don't need to be 100% today because the first thing you do after they haven't sprinted a while going 100%, even if it's 10 yards, so it's not hamstring intensive, they're going to tense up. They're not going to look great. I'd rather you execute extremely well at 85, 90% so we can increase the technical soundness of our athletes. So when we do get to 100%, they're prepared. So this second week, we got to some 90, some 100% reps on the 2-point ACell. And then we went to change of direction, squat and sway, shuffle stick, right? Crossover run stick, very rudimentary stuff. Like there's no need to do 5-10-5s. There's no need to do open field agilities. We have time. So how rudimentary can we be? How dialed in can they be in their movement patterns? And then we did rudimentary hop series from Altus. So we did a ton of those variations. So trying to build fascial lines, trying to work on the amortization of the ankle, knee, hip in a quality manner with those extensive hops with the rudimentary series, rather than going and running gassers or 110s, because those are improper poor foot contacts versus I can train really good foot contacts as well as get other qualities with the rudimentary series. So that's kind of the layout of our field work currently.
I was talking to our offensive coordinator yesterday, and this is the one thing that I would say that to continue to think about that I was talking to him about is the longer period we have where we haven't done football specific things, the longer gap in between those, to me, the longer the gap has to be of how we progress back into them. And the point we were talking about how much football stuff should we be doing right now, and I've gotten some arguments with a few coaches around the country of, you know, who are either one, they're all gung ho into football, or vice versa, is we shouldn't be doing any football. We should only be doing strength training right now. And my argument is we should probably be somewhere in between, because at some point we're going to ask these kids to put pads back on. We're going to ask them to go back out, and we're going to ask them to practice, and we're going to have them doing things. Well, if it's been 6 months or 8 months or 10 months since they've been exposed to that stimulus, we're going to have some massive acute spikes of something, whether that is a general load, which we can mimic sometimes, but movement, proprioception, reactivity, those are things that we as strength staffs, we can't completely mimic those things. And so I think it's a balance of, for you, where you are right now is where when we were there, is I'm asking myself is what is that balance as far as like, no, I don't want to progress them too quickly, but if I don't, someone will. And, you know, in what fashion and what order. And I don't know the answer, but I'll tell you that was probably the most difficult part of trying to find what that balance was of, we have to start, you know, because at that point, our mind was we have 6 weeks and we're playing football. You know, how the hell are we going to get ready for that? And so it's, and then for you, I don't know, Coach, when do you guys start spring ball or fall ball? Do you know?
No, we're not there yet, but I'll tell you what, like you said, it's all about the relationships and having those tough conversations. So at some point they're going to want to get back. And what we have to avoid, obviously, as you know, is, hey, 4 weeks. All right, let's do practice twice a week. No,
Right.
we got to implement the technical, tactical stuff now at a very rudimentary pace. And let's progress everything like we have that 4-month or 11-month out mentality. So we've done a ton of Zoom. I mean, everybody's Zoomed out, but our coaches week 2 are implementing more position meetings via Zoom. Week 3, they're going to introduce some walkthrough, potentially week 4 walkthrough as well. And then 5, maybe 1 walkthrough, 1 more, 20-minute indie session. Maybe I give up the last 10 minutes of a speed session where they tack on another 10. So we're progressing in this stepwise manner. But I think that's a really key component that you mentioned is the longer the layoff, the more stiff, the more sore, the more diminishing all those qualities are going to become. So how are we going to build those back up? And a lot of coaches the word I'd use is impatient. So, somebody's going to build them up. And I really like that you said that. That's funny.
What is your goal as far as where do you want to, where do you want to get, like, whatever, let's say you're practicing in 8 weeks or 10 weeks from now, where is your goal as far as where you want them to be realistically? And I guess, how are you going to get there?
Yeah, I think it definitely comes. It's not going to be like a traditional spring ball, right? It's not going to like a quote unquote spring ball versus fall ball. Like they didn't have 5 weeks off for winter break; they had 5 months off. They don't have 7 weeks to prepare; they might have 6. So we're going to have the coaches meet us halfway. We can't go out and have a 24 period, full contact practice week 3 or day 3. Like no shot, right? So how are we going to implement the technical, tactical, the indies, the walkthroughs as we progress into that? But then realistically, what's it going to look like come practice 1? Because it can't look like a traditional practice. The volume's not there. The acute to chronic workload's not there. The accumulated load's just not there. So as you know, we could prep, I could sit here and say, hey, this is our 8-week plan. But after 3 weeks, that's going to be covered in red ink, right? Because so-and-so the bigs aren't progressing the way I imagine, or the skill is progressing faster than I imagine. So it's really taking it 2 to 3 weeks at a time and just building them up day by day. I don't think, anybody, I'd love to hear from somebody who's like, yeah, 8 weeks, everybody's going to be here. That's exactly where they'll be. They'll be locked in. They'll be prepped for X, Y, and Z. It's like, hey, man, we ain't there. I haven't seen them in 5 months. I've now seen my guys in 2 weeks 5 times. So, taking 5 months off, I do know my guys really well, but not seeing them for 5 months and then having 5 days with them, I still don't know where they're at. And I don't think any of us will know where they're at for a number of weeks now. So that's kind of the thought process behind it. It's definitely a work in progress, as you alluded to.
Yeah, and what you said right in the beginning is they're all going to progress so much differently, more so than ever before, because, whatever, they get 5 weeks off. If you have 50% that do a bunch of work over those 5 weeks and 50% that don't, that's a lot different than 5 months. So you got guys that are going to be in complete different spots. And that's the tricky thing about where we are now is the guys that have been doing this right since the beginning are in a lot different spot than the guys that legitimately didn't do anything for 4 months, and just where they are from as far as that gap. And so more than ever, I see a much larger gap between our top and our bottom. I see a much larger gap between what most of the team can handle, but still where the training level of some of them are. And it's larger than it's ever been, at least in my career, over the breaks,
Yeah, and I'm assuming you're going to agree with me here. I'd much rather undertrain that top 5% than overtrain the other 95. So what we're doing to kind of, adjust the scale a little bit as you would, we're given like an optional 3rd day. Like, hey, if you did stuff right over break, like have some ownership. If not, great. You have the 2 days, it's great. If not, hey, here's a 3rd day for the field. And then in the weight room, we're currently doing escalated density training. So throw 10 to 15 minutes on the clock, right? If I'm in terrible shape, maybe I'm only getting 3 sets in, right? Have 2 major movements paired up because we have to take the survey, we got to take temperature, and we got to wipe down everything. So that's 20 minutes of my lift right there, right? I get 1 hour. So it's like, how efficient can I be with my time? Okay, let's pair up single arm dumbbell bench or feet elevated push-ups and barbell RDL. Like, let's be very light. Let's be very rudimentary. Let's work on movement patterns. But, hey, go get as many sets as you can because nobody knows the maxes, right? Everybody's maxes are way off. Everybody's conditioning is way off. So if I'm way out of shape, maybe I get 3. Coach Gildersleeve, you're really in shape. Maybe you get 5 sets in those 12 minutes. So that's another way that we're going about like adjusting the conditioning for our guys who may be on different levels rather than going out and running 300s or 1.
Yeah, no, I think that's freaking awesome. And I couldn't agree more with, like I told you, I think before we got on air was I tried to regress things as much as humanly possible. And I wish I would have even regressed them more than that. And as far as there's slow cook it, especially now that you're not playing. And I think that's awesome. Put time on the clock, see how they do, see what they do, and that's a great way to start. So I'm excited to keep in contact and see just how that progresses through until you start playing football and see what you adapt. Like you said, Coach, what is it? How did you get to Villanova? What's your background for people that don't know yet? How did you get to Villanova? Who are your mentors? As far as you talk about all your, we see eye to eye. We talk about how our philosophies are similar, but where did you learn most of your stuff from?
Yeah, so I guess working backwards, this will be my 3rd year at Villanova. Prior to that, I was at San Jose State. That's kind of where the educational piece really came in. I was a GA my first year, an assistant my second year under Gary Uribe, Mike Nicolini. Mike Nicolini's on the Niners staff right now, but those guys really introduced me to, the James Smith, the Charlie Francis, the Boo Schexnayder, the Altus. Like that door opened up and it's been cascading ever since. Prior to that, I was at, where was I? Clemson, and I was an intern with track and baseball primarily. Prior to that, under Rick Franzblau. Prior to that, I was at Kutztown as the head strength coach / D-line coach. So at 22, I made every mistake in the entire book. Thankfully, the head coach didn't fire me week 1. And prior to that, I was at North Dakota State under Jim Kramer. And then I played and coached at Holy Cross under Jeff Oliver. So he was like my boss, my mentor. He was also my landlord. And I think you take bits and pieces from everybody that you come across, right? And you take, like one example, Jeff Oliver, like one of the best dudes I've ever met, like has had such an impact on my life as a strength coach, as a person, like just an elite human, right? And I'll always be in debt to him for that, right? And then some places I've been, it's like, hey, I know I don't want that included in my program. I don't want to act like that. And some places I'm like, oh, you take bits and pieces from everybody, whether it's a personality, whether it's programming, whether it's, a scientific style, like whatever it may be, and then conversations like these. Like I've never been a social media guy. I've always kind of kept everything in-house with staffs. And it's like during quarantine, I was like, all right, like, my buddy's wife made me an Instagram. Like, I'm not going to use it. Okay, whatever. And then quarantine happened. And then I'm like, all right, like I'll start connecting. And then it's like, talk to you. I've talked to so many other coaches. It's just, you grow so much through social media. It can backfire, obviously, if you don't use it properly. But, that's kind of a long way of saying I've been in a lot of places. And I've just picked up and stolen a lot of different things from a lot of different people that are smarter than me.
Yeah, I think I'd say similar background to what I've done a lot of trial and error, and there's so much information out there right now, as you alluded to, especially with social media. I really think that, especially as directors and head strength coaches, my opinion is what really separates a lot of them as far as their programming and how they do it is how they apply what they learn, and take, once again, everyone who reads Altus stuff, I've raved about Altus now for years, and I've taken a lot of their things. I think we apply those things really, really well here in our program. I think it's one of the things that makes our program different. Same thing with when I look at your program, I talk to you, you apply things really well. What is your process then for that? As far as you see something, you talk to a coach, you see something on Altus, how do you go about applying that to your program?
I think like everybody sees something on social media, or I talk to you and I'm like, oh, I have to try that, right? And then they throw it into their program and it's throwing a bunch of shit on a wall and seeing what sticks. And I'd much rather follow within our system, which is the high-low CNS system popularized by Charlie Francis. And now under that umbrella, I can implement a ton of different modalities, right? And then you reverse engineer sport. Okay, I have to be here. I have 8 hours every week for the next 11 months to do it. Where does this fit in within the system, within the time of year? And does it make sense, right? Can the kids learn it? Where are they at in their educational process? Are they unconsciously incompetent? Are they consciously incompetent, right? Like there's so many different factors that go into making that decision. I think coaches are so quick to, oh, I saw a triple broad jump. I'm going to do that week 2. It's like, can your guys decelerate? Can they really extend their hips on a long jump before they like even get into it? Like there's so many factors that go into it, but that philosophy of the high-low central nervous system, looking at the annual plan, then zoom in on the scope, the monthly plan. What are the guys ready for, right? You may want to do Boo Schexnayder triple, like right, left, plyo, but that's almost mimicking sprinting when it comes to ground reaction forces. So like, are they prepared for that? Probably not. So I try a lot on myself. And then like you said, a lot of trial and error as well. So I try and make as, competent a decision as possible. And I'd like to say that, I'd like to think that we do a good job of thinking it out and planning it out. And sometimes, sometimes you have to tweak your program. Like we said, it could be covered in red ink in three weeks.
Yeah, we talk about this all the time as a staff. I beg and I implore people to please get context. It's context is everything. And in my mind, I'm not the social media basher. I have my beliefs and I believe in them very, very purely and strongly, but context is everything. And to me, if coach, if you're running something that I don't agree with, I'll tell you. But if you have reason for it and the context behind it makes sense and it's what you believe in, like it's what you believe in, so be it. It's not what we're gonna run here, but I respect it. But same thing with applying something to your program. If I'm gonna apply something that you do to your program, I want to know the context of the situation. I want to know what it is. I want to know why you do it. I want to know where you got it. I want to know how it works. I want to know where you put it in. I want to know what you've learned from it. Anything like specific you can think about that you've seen, you've tried to apply to your program, and it was no bueno, or vice versa. Like an example of, hey, I took this, I read this, I got the context of it, I applied it, and it was a game changer.
Yeah, speaking to your social media point, I think everybody's quick to think they're the best strength coach in the room, and I kind of assume the opposite. I want to say, hey, Gildersleeve had this on social media, and maybe I don't agree with it. Hey, coach, what's your reasoning behind that? Like, actually DM them and ask, because then you're going to say, hey, Tuck, you're an idiot. Like X, Y, Z, this is why, and now I'm a better coach because of that. And that's actually what's been going on. I've just been like, hey, like this looks good. Where does it fall on your plan? What group's doing it and why? So I think asking why is a really important question, and that's definitely gotten me better, as well as conversations with our staff here at Villanova. But when it comes to, application of and what you want to try, right? I come back every year and I analyze the program. I'm like, I hated that, or that didn't look good. One thing that comes to mind is some of the Franz Bosch drills. I went to one of his seminars, and it's like, okay, like, in the NCAA 8 hours, where does this fall in? I think, now after kind of experimenting in myself and with the team, it's like, okay, if I'm spending more than 5 minutes a week on it, I'm not like, I think that's a little too much. I think we might've been at like 15, mix them in the warm up a little at first. But I just, after utilizing it, it's like, okay, I don't really know how much stimulus it's providing. And, we have so many other qualities to take care of. If you're a track coach, like, sure, go crazy, because you have to get them to run fast and in a straight line and turn left sometimes. We have a lot more qualities to enhance as a football performance coach. So that'd be one thing that I think that I was a little gung-ho about, that I didn't necessarily love following.
I think it's tricky sometimes, because there's sometimes you think like you really know what your pillars are, but you start to look back, and if you look through your program over a 2, 3, 4 year span, you can learn, like you can even go back and see, like, oh shit, I must have been reading this when I wrote this program, but it's not in there anymore, because you trial and error some things. And I always say, I don't even remember what the scenario was, but there was a day that I could maybe, all right, you know what it was? When I first got here to Buffalo, the team was training for a week, but my 2 assistants at the time flew down to the conference. But I stayed here and trained the team. But so I had to set up everything up. I didn't have any interns, I didn't have anything. And so I just started thinking, I'm like, man, that's how you really know if you believe in something, because your ass will get out there and set it up if you really think it works that much. Like, I'm sitting there setting up heavy sled sprints, and I'm like, that's how I know I believe in heavy sled sprints, because I just set up 12 sleds by myself. And so if I didn't really believe in it, I was like, hey, let's just do flying tens. Forget it, And so you go through some of those things and you see, but it's definitely funny to watch your programming and how you apply things. And, I think it's also, there's nothing wrong with trying things. I think there's being open-minded. I think there's certainly a piece to that, but like you said, you got to have context. You can't just take whatever you see on YouTube and just try it. If there's no context, there's no backbone.
Yeah, I think like one thing I took from Tim Karen was principles over methods, right? And I think we get lost in that sometimes. Like, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. I'm going to do this. It's like, what's the principle? Is it like law of specificity? Is accumulating? Like, what is the principle you're trying to develop? How are you going to provide the stimuli to elicit that adaptation? So I'm going to follow these sound principles underneath our umbrella system. So our meat and potatoes is that, right? High-low CNS, follow the principles, all right? And then as we progress off of that, maybe the cherry on top is, oh shit, I just went to the Altus, like looking back 2 years, like that's when I went to Altus. Okay, now like the next week, all right, here's what changed, here's what implemented, and then a month later, how that progressed and moved further. So the principles within the system should be very, very consistent and scientific based, right? You shouldn't be like, hey, this month I'm going to do 5-3-1. All right, maybe next month I'll do velocity-based training. It's like, no. What's the system? What's the progression? What are the principles? And then all that other stuff is like icing on the cake, sure. But I think that meat and potatoes sometimes gets looked over as like not sexy, but that's the sexiest thing about it, man, is the science.
No, that was PPSA, right? That was on that where he gave the methods versus principles.
Yeah, and then I went out to his clinic as well over
Oh,
at
did you?
yeah. So it was a very similar talk, but he dove into it a little more. But yeah, exactly. And people left that talk and talking to Tim after, Coach Karen after, and they left that talk and they're like, oh man, and it's like, well, that's actually what it should be. It's like, that's actually what it should be. Like, that shouldn't be groundbreaking to a scientific based field, right? It shouldn't be, but it was to an extent. So, Coach Karen does an awesome job.
He's smart as hell. Yeah. If anybody listening to this, if you haven't ever listened to it, he gave it during quarantine. I can't remember when, but it was on the PPSA YouTube channel. It's worth watching if you haven't watched it. We actually did a staff development on that presentation. It was very, very good, especially for young coaches. As you're trying to organize your thoughts and your philosophies, outstanding way to just understand how to organize. And as you're moving through different coaches and learning to just be able to put thoughts places. Curious, and I know a little bit of the answer, but in normal times, just walk us through kind of general programming. Obviously, you said high-low, and but if you just, I guess, give me a standard week of training, how you break things down, what you're looking for, goals throughout an annual plan, so on and so forth. Just kind of go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, sure. I think your team is a byproduct of you, right? And I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But then every other coach has the junior or senior, and there's 4 or 5 guys, and it's like, oh man, well, those guys. Well, no, those are your guys. So they're not the other coach. They're not the previous regime's guys. Those are your guys. Take ownership of that. If you have 9 out of your 10 juniors or backside, maybe you should tone down the lactic bath running. And maybe you should do more mechanics. So there's a lot of different things that go into, right, a training week, as everybody knows. So you look inside your system and how you're going to apply those principles to elicit adaptation. So our general philosophy, right, would be the high-low CNS. So Monday would be a low day coming off those two off days. Tuesday would be a high day. Thursday would be a low day. Friday would be a high day. As we get closer to season, so like a July, we're going to introduce a third high day. So we go Monday, Wednesday, Friday, high CNS, Tuesday, Thursday, low CNS, right? Because the guys are going into practice and camp soon. So we need to provide more high volume, high velocity yardage to their system. So we're going to marry that stimuli up with the weight room. So if it's high CNS on the field, it's going to be high CNS in the weight room. If it's low CNS on the field, it's going to be low CNS in the weight room. So what that looks like is from motor unit recruitment standpoint, from a intensity on the barbell standpoint, and from a global load, axial load management, or a global load management and axial loading standpoint. Those are kind of the metrics that we analyze when we look at exercise selection, right? Because you can do a 5-10-5 extensively, and that can be on your low CNS day, right? And so it's not exercise dependent. I think it's category dependent in that. So what time of year and what your goal is are going to dictate where those exercises are based. So January, right now, after an 8-week layoff, we can do plyo, linear, lateral 4 days a week if we wanted to, because we can be in an extremely extensive and teaching intensive, physical extensive environment. So now we're exposing them to the positions and the movements more frequently. So they're going to pick it up. They're in a less fatigued state. So when you look at that learning process and take them through that unconsciously incompetent to unconsciously competent, that spectrum, how are we progressing them through that, and what the education process of that looks like, I think is a far overlooked sector of our job as educators, right? We're educators of movement and physical output. So how we go about teaching is extremely important. So we definitely analyze that in our, protocols as well when building out our system.
What are you using for when you're watching sprints and everything? Are you using any apps? Are you a particular kind of how you like to watch things? Are you having one of your assistants coach and you're just standing back watching the reps? How do you like to assess mechanics and everything?
Yeah, I think that starts in the warm up. I think, if guys aren't joking around, if guys aren't popping off the ground, if their free contacts suck, if they're heavy footed, I think you can really tell if they're primed up or not for a sprint session. So that's like warm up's always an analysis of them from the previous day, from the previous week, from the previous night, their social life, all that stuff, their girls or significant others, whatever they got going on. You can tell like guys get in a routine. So that's step one. And, step two, if we're doing an ACL day where we're starting with some starts, I want to have a coach from the front, the lateral. So I don't want all four coaches standing from the side, right? I want coaches at different angles. And I think one thing I go back and forth on, and maybe you can touch on this, coach, is like, I always like waterfall on our guys because it builds in rest. It allows coaches to not get anxious and have everybody standing around, right? It allows guys to see technical faults of others and take coaching. But I do like, hey, get me and Coach Gildersleeve up on the line next to each other. Hey, like 10-yard burst, who's going to win? So I think there's like a time and place for both. I think the waterfall would be our bread and butter when it comes to that, like me go, then the next guy go when he's done, then the next guy go. Would be like our bread and butter when it comes to analysis and speed performance. But I do love having competitive atmospheres involved because I do think it cranks up the intensity a notch. I'd love to hear what you thought about that.
I'm literally right there with you. We're as far as anything technical, we're very much so waterfall based, especially in the current climate where some of our older guys are a little distracted right now with everything going on. Sometimes there's not a lot of purpose behind the warm up and the rudiment and the dribbling and the dribble bleeds, and so you isolate a guy and have 24 guys watch. But I mean, I've waterfalled flying tens. I love, at least, but where I am right now, I feel like I can watch three guys at a time pretty well. So, if we're doing stations, we're doing 30-yard chain sprints. I might have 30 or three guys go at a time, but still waterfall. These three guys go, and these three guys go, and these three guys go. But very, very rarely will you see me line up 24 guys and take them through something that I actually want to analyze, because I might be able to see three, but I'm missing 21, whatever, to at least to the quality that I want to watch and really be able to assess and change.
Yeah. And so like pre-COVID times, we'd go, if we had a group of like a 30, right, we got 10 chain setups. Bigs are on one part of the chain, skillies are on another. So we have different weights set up per them. And then, right, three to a chain. And it's like, okay, two down at the far end, the one guy sprints, the other guy sprints back. Like now you build in that rest, right? We could share equipment back then. We can't right now. But you build in that rest. You have the waterfall. You can hold guys accountable. Then they're having conversations back there. Like our biggest thing is like, who's coaching that guy? And they know that if I'm in your line, Coach Gildersleeve, like I'm responsible to coach you too, because that's your teammate. And if you can't figure it out, like that's going to hurt us on game day. So I'm not the only coach out there. The assistants aren't the only coach out there. If we have a group of 30, there's 30 coaches out there. And that's been huge for us, because if we had a guy standing around in the weight room, so, we pair a lot of things. So our guys are moving a lot. So we build our capacity up in that regard too, as well as our low CNS work. But if they're standing around like, oh, I finished good, go coach somebody. Like go pick up your teammate. That gets the communication factor up, gets leadership up. And like I can spit, all the coaching cues I want. If that flies over your head and you don't retain any of it, it's irrelevant. So now I know you've retained it because you can not only say it back to me, but also coach someone else.
Talking about chain sprints, and it just gets thinking about a conversation I had a coach call me about the other day, because I don't know, some podcast or presentation I gave sometime that he listened to. I talked about like sub-maximal sprinting and how, loading a sprint in our program, I don't know if you agree or not, is a sub-maximal sprint. And I look at everything on as far as velocities. The higher velocities we're reaching, the higher intensity the movement is. So if I put a chain behind you, that's a sub-maximal exercise. That's something that as we program, for example, we might have, week one or week 1 and 2 is 10-yard laser sprints, right? That's our maximal effort movement. Sub-maximally, to prepare us for week 3 and 4, we're running chained 20-yard sprints to bring the velocities down, but to prep the tissues for going 20 yards. And then we go into the next phase. Now we're lasering 20 yards. We're sub-max chain sprinting 30 to prep the tissues for what's coming. Then we're lasering 30 yards, but we're chain sprinting 40. Then we're working into flying tens where the velocities are at all-time high, and we might be, at that point off of chains and doing wickets or something along those lines. Anything you do with that in your program?
I agree 100%. So, like you said, it is submax from a velocity standpoint, not an intent standpoint. So, if you go and say, hey guys, we're going to do 80% 20s today with no chains, I mean, half the guys are going to half-ass it. Half the guys are going to go 98% because they don't know how to go 80, right? The techniques can be all over the place. Having that backside pull makes you push more. So from an upright posture, it might make some over pushers, but it just depends on the load that's on the chain too. If you have 80 pounds on the chain, it's going to be lower or higher up on the force side of the force velocity curve. So Ken Clark's lives like 10 minutes from me. I was over training with him, and he has me strapped up. We're doing some load velocity. I mean, I ran like 20 sprints with this guy. It was terrible. I'm like, dude, you're going to kill me. But we throw on a 20-pound chain, and I'm hitting 92% velo. So I'm not only prepping, I'm prepping that tissue for 100% effort, but I'm easing into it. So the intensity from a velocity standpoint is increased, but intent, technically, mechanically, it's a max effort. That doesn't mean it's a max intensity, though. You could do a max effort squat at 75% if you're going for strength speed, but that doesn't mean it's a maximal intensity on the bar. So I think that discernment that you made is really pertinent. And that's exactly what we do for max velocity sprinting. Like week 2, we're not doing flying 30s, right? Week 2, we're prepping tissue in a sub-max environment from a velo standpoint, but mechanically, technically, effort-wise, the intent's through the roof with that light resistance chain.
Touch on your volume a little bit as far as when you're, whatever, let's say you're doing a horizontal vector day, a vertical vector day, you got whatever stations, whatever sprints, what's a day look like as far as volume?
And that's the quote unquote like dose, right? The medicine is very powerful or poisonous depending on the dose. So you could be a sprint based program and have 500 high velocity yardage week 3 and you'd have 9 hammies, right? Or you could be of the other end of the spectrum where, hey, we're going to do wall drills, dowel drills, and jogging 10s for a month because we want to slow cook them. And it's like, okay, well, you just didn't provide any neurological speed stimulus for a month, right? That linear periodization approach. We're going to do marches for 3 weeks, like wall drills for 3 weeks and balance for 3 weeks. Like, okay, you just spent 2 months doing zero sprinting. So having that light resistance really allows you to have those sprints, quote unquote, early and often in your program. So ACL dominant day would be like our horizontal force dominant day. So we'll have higher volumes on that day because the hamstring's not involved as much, which is a little bit of a muscle that likes to show exactly where your acute to chronic workload is and be the first one to go. So when we're upright, we're a little more conservative from that regard in our elastic dominant day, tendon dominant day. So it depends on the time of year, but we'll always sprint, jump, throw on those high CNS days in some capacity. So depending on the time of year, say it's the bigs. So let's say specifically bigs, like week 3 of a normal winter, right? Maybe we're progressing from a non-counter movement broad jump to a counter movement broad jump. We like to do not a lot of non-counter movement stuff with our bigs because that's where they go from in sport, right? Like a DB is going from counter movement and elastic driven a lot more. So they're going to be a lot more counter movement, a lot more hop into, skip into, things like that. Our bigs, I want overcoming that inertia. So, maybe 3x3 on a med ball throw, maybe depending on the whatever jump variation. If it's a double broad jump, say it's week 3 in the winter, double broad jump for our 300-pound guys. Maybe that's 2 sets of 3. So a double stick, okay, reset, go to the back of the line. Now you're resting, 30, 40, maybe a minute before you hit that next double. Right? Because everybody will say they do plyos and sprints, but then they'll jog back or jog to and from each station. It's like, no, you're running and doing hops. And then, so I did med balls, I did jumps, and then whatever sprint variation, maybe we do some dive starts early on, depending on, how their technique looks. And then, 3-point starts, 2-point ACLs, maybe 4 to 6 sets of 10. We do a lot of ranges. So, hey, Coach McNally, Coach Gildersleeve, you guys hit 4 and you feel good. Hey, go hit 1 or 2 more. Hey, I hit 4. Hey, coach, I'm a little tired. I'm a little fatigued. I feel tight. All right, well, 1, now I know you didn't do the card at home, but 2, like, great, you hit 4, like, shut it down. Like, what are we going to get from a 5th? Like, you know what I mean? Coach Ray at Alabama did a 1080 motion presentation, and I think the term he used was tight, tired, or bored, and I really like that. Like, go until they're tight, tired, or bored. I thought that was just a quick way, like easy rule of thumb. But we do a lot of ranges and give our players a lot of autonomy. So that's like an A cell dominant day. And then you always want to look at the overall yardage. I think coaches overlook maybe their last 2 bursts in the warm-up, their dribble bleeds in the warm-up, their straight leg bounds in the warm-up. All that's going to accumulate as load. So just factoring that into the overall volume, whether it's an A-cell day or a max V dominant day, I think is really important.
Coach, I want to jump in and ask you a question about kind of just taking account for that volume when you give ranges. It's something we've talked about here because we do similar things. You know, on the card, it's going to say 2 to 4 reps, 3 to 5 reps, and we do similar things, ask the guys how they're feeling. But conversation we have, and I'm just not really sure where I stand on it personally, would be, you know, what if you got a guy who's tight, tired, or bored 4 weeks in a row, and he's hitting the low end of that volume 4 weeks in a row? How do you account for that? Or are you accounting for that? Maybe you're talking about a summer training program. You got 9 weeks, and 5 out of the 9 weeks he's been on the low end of that volume. You know, are you aware of that? What are you doing to combat that?
That's a really good question. I think, as anything, it depends. And one of our guys comes to mind in particular. And this guy we called him Backside McGee because he was on the ground so long. And we're trying constraints based. We're trying cute. Like, we're throwing everything at this guy, and he's starting to really get it. Like, he's actually front side now. And I'm like shocked. I'm like, dude, who taught you to run? Like, when did that happen? Because I don't remember that happening, 18 months ago. I think it's been a very slow, painstaking progression, but he's backside as hell. He's going to be on the ground longer. His hamstrings are going to be under more strain. He's going to be anterior pelvic tilt, right? Like, he's going to fatigue quicker. So that guy, now that you mentioned that, was always on the lower end. You know what I mean? And I'd be lying if I said, like, oh, hey, I need to go out and make sure he gets the high end today, because at what cost is that going to come, right? And I understand, hey, we got to prep him for a game, 72 snaps, 12 6-play drives. Like, we have to get him ready. So I think you can accumulate some lower velocity yardage, so 15s, 20s, rather than your flying 30s, 40s, as a way to combat that, right? Your plan B is a well-developed and executed plan B is just as good as a plan A. You're a 95% as good as a plan A. So maybe he gets more sets of dribble bleeds in, maybe he gets more sets of straight leg bounds or just A cells in. Those are just some things that come to mind right off the top of my head, but I'd love to hear what you guys implement with that as well, because, since we do very similar things, right? Hey, if that guy's hitting 3 8 weeks in a row, but we know we have camp week 10, how are we accounting for that? And that would be my answer for that. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say.
A lot of really good stuff there too, Coach. Like, that's a lot of before Coach's Heist. Great question. I mean, I'd say, well, like, we get the most. The questions I get is, one, I think the biggest mistake I made early on in my career was sprint dosage. And Coach Heist worked for me and with me in 2016, and then came back in 2018 or 19. And I mean, even then, just the amount of sprinting that I prescribed is completely different. But, like, I think one thing that people don't realize is, people look at our program and they go, you're pretty much 8 to 12 sprints, like full max velocity sprints in your sessions. Is that enough? And why doesn't it progress? And to your point earlier about methods and progression in general, principles, is we're progressing in velocity. There's a lot of different ways to progress, but sprinting is very unique in the sense of more is not better. Higher velocities are better. But if I'm running a flying 10 and I'm hitting 1 second and I run 4 of them, and 3 weeks later I'm running a flying 10 and I'm running at 0.92, that's a higher intensity. That is progression, and we're getting faster. But to your point, if I were to have ran 7 or 8 week 1, I probably ain't running a 0.92. I'm probably just continuing to run at the exact same speed over and over. And so actually, by adding repetitions and adding volume to those high intensive movements, a lot of times you're actually regressing them instead of progressing them.
Yeah, and I think, like, let's stay with that 3 to 4 rep range. Like, how can we progress them even further? And, like, things that we'll utilize, like, okay, I'll prime them up for that fly 10 with 3 to 4 reps of wickets, with 3 to 4 reps of chain sprints, right? And then 3 to 4 reps. Like the wickets, sure, they're at 80%, but they're great technical reps, right? And that's not for speed development, it's for technical development. And drills don't make you fast, right? That's what Dan Paff says. Like they provide context, which you can apply then during your speed reps. And then as you progress deeper and deeper into off season, maybe you're contrasting those chains, right? What does your chain load look like? Are you doing 10 pounds, 20 pounds, 30 pounds? You're just doing linear vertically? Because guess what? That's decelerating. That's decreasing the velocity in a linear fashion, or whatever the opposite of linear is. I don't know. But like, how does that look? Because I think coaches are quick to say chain sprints or jump into that, but what's the load look like? And then how are you progressing? Are you going, base to contrast? You jumping right into contrast where now the learning curve is so much steeper. They're probably outside that 10% failure zone if you're going contrast right away, because maybe they're technically not as sound. So those are just things that go through my mind, right? Because we're very similar from hey, sometimes we'll go as low as 2, like week 1 or 2, week 3, like, hey, 2 to 3 wickets, 3 to 4 chains, 1 to 2 flies. Like, and then, okay, maybe add a rep of flies the next week, take a rep out of chains or wickets. Like there's a lot of different methods we'll utilize, but the goal is the same, as you just mentioned, is increase velo.
Isaac, did you have something you were going to say?
I did, but I actually have another question that's more pertinent now. So I'm just gonna roll into that. I guess. So if we're talking about high speed running and the yardages we're trying to get in the high speed running and trying to mimic, camp, right? That's what we train for every year. We're training for camp. We won't say we're training for football. We're training for camp because camp trains them for football. Okay, so like the question would be, what do you consider high speed running? And then if we're talking about a guy, back to my previous question, missing a couple reps of max velocity, max effort sprinting, he's not necessarily missing out on all of the high speed running that you're getting. And so if you look at the train of thought of, okay, you need to touch 90 to 95% of your max velocity every 7 to 10 days or so. If he's still getting that, and we can accumulate some high speed yardage of maybe 80% of your max velocity, are you going to now get that volume that we're talking about needing to accumulate?
Yeah, so I know, like Charlie says, like you just said, like 95 plus, 90 to 95. So we tend to stay around there. I think they did a study in Gaelic football, like the sprinting vaccine. It was 6 to 10. Max V reps was like the money sweet spot for injury prevention. And then you got to take into account, okay, helmet, shoulder pads, like they're not hitting 95%.
Hell yeah.
Defender in front of them. It is not a true max output. It's operational output. So when we go to increase these velos in shorts and lasers in a non-fatigued environment where it's not very stressful, right? That's increasing their max output while decreasing their, like, the operational cost of running that fast. So we
like the 75% on the bar moving with 100% intensity, right? It's you throw on shoulder pads and helmets and your intent can be 100%, but your velocity is just not.
Exactly. So we try like hell to stay away from those middle zones, in all honesty, because I don't like. One of the things Luke Corrales talked about in your coaches versus COVID webinar, Coach Gildersleeve, was be careful what you get good at. And he was talking about culture and skipping reps, but hey, be careful about running at 80% and getting really good at that, right? Like at all costs, we're trying to increase speed reserve on the field. And I understand your point of like, okay, how do we accumulate the high speed yardage, prep them for practice? Like we accumulate a ton of low speed yardage with their aerobic base training. And we can kind of dive into like the tempos and the variations, because I don't think linear tempos are the way to do it. They're a way to do it. But, we'll touch some lactic capacity stuff in July right before camp just to prep it. But I really don't spend more than 3 or 4 days on it a year.
Very good. Now, I got to save some time, Coach. I gotta let you plug Sprint Timber. Tell me a little bit about it. I've obviously been following you. I didn't get my T-shirt yet, but other than that,
I think that's lost in the mail. So Sprint Timber, right? It's exactly what it sounds like, man. It's the month of September. Let's highlight and talk about and discuss and educate and build a community around sprinting, right? You look at around the country, what seems to be popular may not necessarily be that category I just mentioned. I think it's getting better via the Derek Hansons, the Ken Clarks, the Altis, like these giants in the field are becoming more and more popular in the strength conditioning coach community and the track community, right? They've been there. But the grind culture of football, I think, has steered strength and conditioning towards everybody must sweat and bear crawl and run 300s to get better. When in reality, zoom out and just think, okay, what adaptation am I getting from all this? So it's an educational month. It's interactive. Like people are I'm shocked. I plugged it away for 2 weeks. I was not very shy about it. And it was like, okay, 600 coaches signed up. I'm like, all right, like I'm surprised because I thought just my friends would do it. Like, great. Hopefully I don't have 100 t-shirts in my house in November. But as we launched it, September 1st, we had 1,000 coaches sign up in 24 hours. And I'm sitting there on my computer at 5 o'clock at night after work at Villanova. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, what do I do? Like, I have no idea how to send this program. I'm like not prepared a system at all for this. But that's exactly what it is, man. I'm just going to try and keep posting content similar to this conversation. It's been awesome. I feel like I take away and learn every single time I talk to a coach, and that this conversation is no different with you all. So I'm just trying to put something positive out there in the world, create conversation, and popularize sprinting and speed development. So misconceptions, myths, best ways. So I think we've come a long way. I still think we have a long way to go as a performance community. So Sprintember, it's a party. Follow me on Instagram, and you can find the download link at my website, just-sprint.com/Sprintember. And I'll send you the free program with my newly devised system that is pretty rudimentary, but it's a system. All right.
Are you pre and post testing your 40, coach?
Not 40. I did do fly 10 and I did vert. So I posted like the other day. I didn't heavy lift off quarantine. I didn't have access, and I PR'd by 0.5 inches on my vert just by sprinting. So I did a fly 10, which I won't share here. I'll share later because everybody will know how slow I am. So did vert, fly 10, and fly 10 were my two primaries. But it's a sprinting. I provided 5 days of field work, a beginner program and an advanced program, so anybody can do it, right? I coined the beginner program like Big Cat, a Tony Holler shout out. You might not dabble in max V, but maybe you're doing A-cells and plyos more frequently. And then the guys who have, been exposed to max velocity very recently, they're training 3 days a week, high CNS, man. We're getting after it.
Well, awesome, coach. Man, I appreciate you taking time. I know you we probably should have done this like when you didn't have a bunch of athletes just get back on campus, but nonetheless, I appreciate the conversations that we've had the last couple months, and appreciate this one as well. And hopefully we can get some people hip to sprinting. And I'm definitely looking forward to continuing to collaborate throughout our careers.
Yeah, man, it's been fun. Appreciate your support. Just keep sprinting, y'all.
All right, coach. Thank you.